Hi everyone, I'm Kaius, and to be honest I had a different video planned for January of this year, but an interesting question has been tickling my brain lately, and also I'm moving everything from Vegas Pro 18 to Vegas Pro 22. Yes, I'm a Vegas Pro victim, so I think a lighter editing load is probably for the best. As of recent, one of my dear friends, we'll call them Mark, because that's their name. Hi Mark.
Oh, hi.
Well, anyway, Mark approached me last week and said pretty plainly that they've been thinking of getting into fighting games. To be honest, that's a statement that always brings some level of childlike joy to me, solely because fighting games are a very special interest of mine. Could you tell? Was it obvious? What could possibly have fucking let that on? As usual, when a friend of mine says they want to get into fighting games, I usually just respond with the ever helpful, then do it. But Mark had the follow-up statement that I was dreading, quite frankly. I don't know which game to start with. This question keeps me up at night. Like I've lost sleep overthinking what someone's first fighting game should be. When someone asks me this question on a coffee date, I break into a cold sweat and I lustfully eye the open window of the lounge in case I need an escape hatch. But no more! I have to really identify this question at its core and match its freak and do what I do best, which is to overthink literally everything. I'm sure my friend just wanted me to respond with something like, "Oh yeah, I play Virtua Fighter 5, it's really fun, you should try it!" But that's not the kind of person I am. I'd be more akin to saying something like, play Rage of the Dragons or hop on Asuka 120%. But when I say that, I'm not really speaking with that person's best interests in mind, you know? I'm speaking with my best interests, and fuck, I really want to play Rage of the Dragons so fucking bad right now. When you have that question asked to you, you really need to think about it in a more macro sense. Like, what do you think they'd like, for example? If you don't know that answer from the get-go, you'd naturally lead into it with some preamble, like, for instance, do they like flashy animated aesthetics, or do they like something gritty and dark? Do they favour something a little more fantastical in tone, like Mortal Kombat? Or are they after something a little more grounded, like Virtua Fighter? Are they interested in learning tools, or are they the kind to, you know, feel things out? What's their stance on characters belting out ableist slurs? I guess what I'm trying to say is, what does this person value out of a game alongside the actual mechanics? I guess you could just cut out the middleman and tell them to try out a game like Grand Blue Fantasy vs Rising, which is available for free, or Fighting EX Lair, which is $1, but I'm trying my best to make a good first impression here, and as much as I love both of those games, I'm trying to think along the lines of what would appeal to the people asking this question and not whichever answer is just easier and more convenient to give. What is an accessible fighting game anyway? If you think that somebody is looking specifically for something that's accessible in a learning sense, then obviously a game like Grand Blue Fantasy vs Rising, Street Fighter 6 or Under Night in Birth 2 are the best bets due to the game's rich learning resources. Having pretty feature-rich and detailed onboarding, with Street Fighter 6 having an entire Sagat dating sim mode with an open world story mode attached to it that literally serves to teach you some of the fundamentals of a 2D fighting game. But this doesn't necessarily equate to an accessible game, because the presence of learning tools isn't inherently accessible. In fact, in some cases, I think it can have the opposite effect. Like, sure, Under Night in Birth may have a thorough in-game tutorial, but how much of it would a new player actually want to sit through? I don't think I've seen any other genre take pride in a tutorial system that has 16 segmented tutorials dedicated to teaching you what a health bar is, or what the state of standing is. Which is crazy because my hot take is that Uni doesn't even need a tutorial of this gravitas. Under Night in Birth is an extremely intuitive series of games, and the mechanics themselves click together really easily without somebody needing to read a high school textbook that treats you like you're 2 years old. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Uni 2. I'm a Uni 2 glazer till death do we part. But holy shit, the tutorial system in Uni is so needlessly patronising that you'd think Frenchbird assumed this was somebody's first video game literally ever made, and that they'd never seen or thought about video games in their entire life. And I think that if my first fighting game had me deal with Eltnum loops, I'd feel entitled to destroying a PlayStation 5 with hammers. And it really makes me wonder why fighting games struggle so hard to get this right, because other genres are barely doing anything in this regard to get players ready to play. Marvel Rivals has a brief tutorial that covers this, but doesn't tell you anything that will help you when you actually start playing the game, like what status effects are. Popular Marvel characters like Deadpool have insanely in-depth movesets, and Deadpool in particular is an outlier because his profile is literally written in character, so it's even harder for an average player to understand. And then to take things even further, while a game like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus has an extremely verbose glossary of basically every fighting game term a new player is likely to hear, a hero shooter like Overwatch 2 or Marvel Rivals— sorry, no wait, while I was editing this video they renamed Overwatch 2 to Overwatch, so let me run that one back. And then to take things even further, while a game like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus has an extremely verbose glossary of basically every fighting game term a new player is likely to hear, a hero shooter like Overwatch or Marvel Rivals doesn't have this at all, and yet terms like staggering and peeling are more widely understood than meaties or tech throwing, despite the latter two being defined in the games themselves. Not even Diva says these terms, and her fucking annoying ass says like every other piece of video game terminology that ever exists. A pretty notable comparison is that people just intuitively know what a C9 is, but probably couldn't tell you what the Wong factor is, despite both of these things being jargon in their respective communities relating to big last-second upsets that are named after specific players. While I was writing this piece, Gail Wingquote posted something on Blue Sky that kinda illustrated exactly what I mean. Deadlock is a game that has a huge issue in this regard. There are way too many keybinds in this game. I bought a new mouse just so that I could play Deadlock without having to keep track of my entire keyboard. The gameplay loop on top of that is more complex than the average hero shooter or MOBA, and matches are a lot more volatile and last significantly longer. But despite all of that, and also it not even fucking being released yet, it's still a more generally popular game. Hell, Fortnite is a game that has no tutorial at all, and I can still drop in that game and get full boxed and two-pieced by Skibbity Capybara 67, who as it turns out is like a third of my age! I suppose pointing and clicking is just a lot easier than maneuvering a character through the screen and controlling their limbs individually, but engaging with these games on a deeper level is arguably way more information to take in than fighting games. Granted, comparing these three genres purely in terms of a terminological sense feels kind of reductive. All of these games have their own depth, and the conversation is a lot deeper than I'm making it out to be. Anyway, forget what I said, because I don't really believe any of that has to do with accessibility. Because, like I already said, I don't actually think that onboarding or learning tools make a game inherently more accessible. Fighting games have much more comprehensive tutorials than other genres because developers have spent years not just reconciling with this. I think that how information is delivered to a player isn't actually all that important to the learning experience, it's more about making sure the information is delivered at all. So what about a fighting game that delivers this kind of information to the player in a more intuitive or even semiotic sense? I guess the first question to ask in that regard is, what the fuck does that even mean? And I'm glad you asked. Well, fighting games handle interaction in a completely different design space from pretty much any other genre. It's not that they're an inherently more difficult genre for that or anything, but fighting game movement is kind of just a different beast to any other genre. Standard movement in a fighting game isn't just movement, it's execution too. These things are intrinsically tied, and that's different to most other games. For example, let's use Mario 64. In that game, you use the control stick to move Mario around. He moves in whatever direction you're pointing based on where the camera is facing. And this is knowledge in locomotion that's transferable to moving Lara Croft, moving Sonic, moving Kakaroo, moving Jill Valentine, moving your avatar in Hello Kitty Island Adventure, moving Luna Snow, moving Bob Belcher, and of course moving Glorio in that anime arena fighter your friend plays despite saying that other fighting games are too hard. In other words, it's kind of a design language that's universally understood because it's ubiquitous. If you hold down in any of these games, these characters will move, well, toward the screen. But in a fighting game, they usually do this. This arcane art is called crouching, and in Mario 64 this is something that's done by pressing a button, not a direction. And in a 2D game it's obviously rather unreasonable to think that this shouldn't be the case because there isn't a forward space to move toward in the first place. This is the rule that most games follow though. Again, regardless of genre, if the game allows your player character to crouch, it's usually tied to a button. But what I neglected to mention is that if you press down in a 2D platformer, your character will do this. This arcane art is called crouching, and if you're experiencing deja vu, that's because I said the exact same thing like 35 seconds ago. This is all to say that while it could be argued that this use of cardinal movement is unintuitive, I strongly disagree. I do think that it's valid to consider them unintuitive coming from other genres, especially in the modern era where games are focusing less and less on 2D movement, but to say that the movement is objectively unintuitive may be a bridge too far. especially when the standard 2D fighting game movement system was adopted by Super Smash Bros., a franchise which was literally made with intuitive and easy to pick up gameplay in mind. You know what game uses cardinal directions in an extremely esoteric way but was one of the most casually appealing and intuitive games of its era? Dance Dance Revolution. Rhythm games are hard to get right. Sure, it might seem like a really simple thing to point out. After all, if you press the down arrow, you press the down arrow, but it doesn't really account for the process of actually pressing the arrow. You use your feet, you take a step back, and you keep your foot there until the next arrow needs it, or you return your feet to the center if you're a pleb and completely fuck up your form. Up to you. So I just spent a whole minute on another tangent talking about why I don't think movement is necessarily what makes the game inherently unintuitive. In that case, what does? Well, in my opinion, on top of game feel, it's how information about the game is presented to the player. A lot of fighting games I mentioned earlier have in-depth tutorial systems that put a lot of effort into making sure mechanics and interactions are explained, when I think games should be focusing on making sure mechanics and interactions are understood. So yeah, let's go over some games that I think nail this. Asuka 120% is not a game I really anticipated ever calling intuitive, and to some extent, a part of me is still firmly trying not to commit to this statement, but another part of me is doubling the fuck down on it. Asuka 120% Limit Over is a game with a lot of systems and small mechanics, but most of this isn't something you need to actively go out of your way to learn, because the game by design is like a canvas that grants players a big opportunity space. Limit Over is a very fluid game where basically every situation is open-ended. I guess on one hand you can make the argument that this makes the game less intuitive since it's not really a straightforward fighting game, but at a lower level it's a game where players are rewarded for acting instinctively and aren't necessarily punished for not knowing the ins and outs of the game. In other words, it's a game that can be felt out, and one where interactions and mechanics are designed to be understood by the player rather than explained to them. Even the manual doesn't really explain the mechanics beyond the controls outside of really basic fighting game stuff. It doesn't teach you about wall teching or clashes or really anything like that. It also has a very free-form movement system that, while very open-ended, isn't terribly complex up to a certain point. Like, yeah, the super jump has iframes up the wazoo, and it can be cancelled into from practically fucking anything, but they don't have to know that. But for one, Limit Over is a quasi-official patch that removes all the UI and single-player content from the game, is Japanese exclusive, and while it has an English patch, patching a patch isn't exactly easy if you don't have the correct tools, and is in of itself a pretty big barrier to entry. There are pre-patched versions of the game out there, but you didn't hear it from me. Okay, so how about something like Soul Calibur? The series uses a really simple to grasp rock, paper, scissors style of gameplay, and the movement, despite being from a 2D point of view, is actually pretty open-ended with its intuitive staple, the 8-way run mechanic. Dead or Alive is pretty similar in that regard too, with its free step system, so what's the problem? Well, disregarding the insanely high amount of post-launch DLC content these things have to offer, and the complete lack of rollback netcode in either of these franchises, which, yes, can and should be a deal breaker for new players too, also kinda suffer from the fact that the existence of free step and 8-way run don't actually impart any transferable knowledge. They're kinda the governing unique selling points of these titles' gameplay loop. Come to think of it, fighting games are a pretty expensive hobby, aren't they? A lot of people feel compelled to purchase a new controller just for the genre, especially on PC where keyboard and mouse aren't really built for it. Then when you get into the nitty gritty of a modern fighting game, the experience of keeping up with them can be a huge investment of not only your time, but your money too. Dragon Ball FighterZ is hitting a point where the game's base roster of 21 characters and 3 unlockable characters is slowly being caught up to by the game's DLC roster of 21 characters. Like, Daima Goku might have been added like 4 years after Lab Coat 21, and don't get me wrong, it's actually incredible that Arxis and Bamco are still willing to support the game this long after release, but I also can't help but feel for the people who might feel a little overwhelmed that after buying a game, they might feel intimidated and worried that, should they push further into the game, they'll feel that paying for these extra characters is a necessity. Something FOMO. Not to mention the fact that the $110 Legendary Edition of Dragon Ball FighterZ is already about to require further investment given it doesn't include the upcoming Daima Goku or whatever future DLC we'll get like John 1000. Obviously it's good that these games get long-term support, but I think it's possible to also criticize that the need to monetize this content, while understandable from a business perspective, also creates an entirely new barrier to entry. That being said, I do think this is a niche nitpick because of course not everybody is going to feel the urge to splurge on games to justify their investment on them, It's just, something that came to mind. The more I think about these points, the more I can't help but wonder if the romantic ideal of the accessible, perfect first fighting game is even a real thing. I mean, truthfully speaking, the concept of perfection is inherently flawed, which is ironic, I know, but bear with me here. Especially if the question I posed at the start of the video is one you find yourself asking often. Like, I could go on all day about how the game presents this problem or that problem, or has some stuff that I personally don't think is right for you, but hey, I'm not you. There are so many games out there that are practically enhanced by their imperfections, and I'm one of those people who firmly believes that media needs to have flaws in order to be truly appreciated. There is no such thing as a flawless piece of art, and that's why it's awesome. Acknowledging the blemishes can also make you really learn to adore the parts of the game that do work. Most of the fighting games I love are rotten with problems and maybe abysmal dog shit, and I wouldn't have it any other way. X-Men Next Dimension feels like it draws inspiration from Dead or Alive 3, but somehow takes all the wrong lessons from it. The graphics are horrifically ugly, gameplay on paper lacks the fluency of other X-Men fighting games like Mutant Academy 2 or Children of the Atom, and the control scheme feels a little clunky and inconsistent at times. But when you get down to it, Next Dimension has a really interesting meter system, DOA-inspired stages that surprisingly pop quite a bit and have a lot of additional sub-stages, and most importantly, it's a grimy as fuck game. There's a well-known glitch called CCR that allows every character to reset their combo counter mid-combo, which also resets the damage scaling, and of course, everybody's got infinites. This is something that would make a game broken in a really boring way, but Next Dimension is so jank that it circles back into being peak. Some of these are so easy to do that even the CPU will perform them in matches. Storm's got a one-button infinite with a lot of forgiveness, and Gambit could exploit an oddity of the game's Okizeme to effectively infinite the opponent despite otherwise being a rather lackluster character due to a game-breaking bug where he literally cannot move for the first 2 seconds at the start of each round. No, this is not a bug that you need to go out of your way to replicate, this just happens every single time, without fail, and you're forced to eat a combo at the start of every round no matter what. Honestly, I think he's just suffering for his Marvel Rivals crimes in advance, so it's okay. Sonic the Fighters is also a game that was largely shunned by the Sonic fanbase for most of its lifetime, as of course treating minor transgressions as the worst thing ever made is what Sonic fans do best. But you don't even need me to tell you that this one is good despite it being seen as a very linear game by fans, because there is a huge, dedicated community for this title now and hundreds of other videos singing all the praises I could sing for a certified Sega AM2 banger. Hokuto no Ken is an objectively horribly balanced title with pretty notable offender Toki at the helm. But it's a legendary title for its dribbling, completely over-the-top infinite combos of legendary infinite clips, and of course, Toki. Yeah, he's a pro and a con for this game, fight me. And even completely overlooked poverty kusuge like Tekken 8, despite their myriad of competitive shortcomings like de-emphasizing neutral gameplay in favour of rewarding unrelenting aggression, have a small but dedicated community of players who are willing to wire up and go online for their surprisingly complex and open-ended title. To quote Gail Wincote, it's got jank soul. You either get it, or you don't. In other words, no matter how many perceived downsides a fighting game has, it really shouldn't affect your perception on what a good entry point into the genre is. Because while people treat fighting games like learning to swim, where there's a shallower safe end and a dangerous deeper end, I think it's more like learning to play an instrument. Because while the 3 chords people will tell you to practice first might be different, ultimately there isn't really a wrong answer, since if you commit, you're probably going to learn to play more of them anyway. I guess in that sense, they're actually pretty intuitive little things. Funny how this mindless rant actually circled back into something, huh? What's that? This doesn't answer the question you presented in your thesis statement at all? Yeah, I guess that's kinda true. But honestly, the real conclusion of this thesis is that we should all be playing the Rumblefish 2. Everyone, go boot up the Rumblefish 2 on Vikid right now! Okay, that's another one for the books. I'm sorry for being gone for so long. I was going to post this in January, but January was kind of rough on me. As for why I didn't post in November, December, I had my Zero Voyage project ongoing, so I didn't really have time to post anything. I did post concept art of Zero Voyage in the meantime on my Patreon, but anyway, speaking of my Patreon, thank you to Mick Xcat, Jericho, Redrill, Phenomenal, Penrost, Kaideen, and Jariah Gardine for their support on KLUB art for Patreon this month. This month's Patreon bonus feature is an afterword, actually. I haven't recorded that yet, but I thought it would be fun to do an afterword because people like listening to my voice, and also this is kind of a topic that doesn't really warrant like a full-on like bonus feature with like all this like pizzazz, or yeah, anyway, thank you for watching. I might have another video out this month. February is a short month, so I don't know. I will try to stabilize my video schedule though, but in the meantime I want to also work on redoing my video assets. Anyway, I will see you guys next time. Bye bye!